What happens when a rancher gave his land to an Apache family? At dawn, their entire tribe came. Witness this unbelievable true-inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. The year was 1873, and the Arizona Territory was a place where survival meant keeping what was yours and trusting no one. For most white settlers, the Apache people were considered enemies, obstacles to progress, threats to their very existence. But Thomas McKenzie wasn't most settlers. Thomas had arrived in the territory 5 years earlier, a widower seeking solace in the vast emptiness of the desert. He'd claimed 2,000 acres along a creek bed that rarely went dry, built a modest ranch house with his own hands, and slowly turned the harsh land into something that could sustain cattle. He worked alone, spoke little, and kept to himself. The neighboring ranchers thought him peculiar, maybe even touched in the head, for choosing isolation over community. One October morning, Thomas discovered a woman collapsed near his water source. She was Apache, badly wounded, with a fever that made her skin burn like desert stone at midday. Beside her lay a small boy, no more than 7 years old, trying desperately to wake his mother. The child's eyes held a mixture of terror and defiance when he saw Thomas approach. Every instinct shaped by the stories of the time told Thomas to ride away, to pretend he'd seen nothing. Apache raids had killed settlers throughout the territory. The army was actively pursuing Apache bands, and harboring them could mean death or imprisonment. But Thomas saw only a dying woman and a frightened child. He carried the woman to his ranch house, the boy following like a suspicious shadow. For 3 weeks, Thomas nursed her back to health, feeding her broth, changing bandages on a gunshot wound that had festered, and teaching the boy basic English words. The woman's name was Neche, and her son was called Kurik. She'd been separated from her family during an army attack on their camp, shot while fleeing, and had been wandering for days trying to survive. As Nate recovered, something unexpected happened. She began helping around the ranch despite Thomas's protests. She possessed knowledge of the land that Thomas could never have learned from books or trial and error. She showed him which plants could heal sick cattle, where to find water during drought, how to read weather patterns in the movement of birds and insects. Kurik proved fearless with the horses, gentling them with a patience that amazed Thomas. The relationship was strange by any measure of that time. They communicated through broken English, hand gestures, and the universal language of shared work. Nate never spoke of her husband, and Thomas learned later that he'd been killed in the same attack that wounded her. They were both marked by loss, both trying to forge meaning from survival. By spring, Thomas had made a decision that would scandalize every rancher within 100 miles. He offered Nate and Kurik a permanent place on his land, not as servants but as equals. He would deed them 500 acres, the section with the best water access, where they could build their own home and live freely. Nature's response was silence. She looked at Thomas for a long moment, her dark eyes searching for deception or ulterior motive. Finally, she spoke in careful English. "My people have no land. Army takes everything. You give land, they will come. Soldiers will come." Thomas understood the risk, but his mind was settled. "Then we'll face it together," he said simply. What Thomas didn't fully grasp was the depth of Apache culture and loyalty. To Nate and Kurik, his offer wasn't merely generosity. It was an act that demanded recognition by their entire community. In Apache tradition, such kindness created bonds that extended far beyond individuals. 3 weeks after, Thomas signed the deed in the small territorial office, witnessed by a bewildered clerk who thought him insane. Something extraordinary happened. Thomas woke before dawn, as was his habit, stepping outside to begin morning chores. The sun hadn't yet breached the horizon, leaving the world in that gray space between night and day. He walked toward the barn, his mind on the sick calf he'd been tending. Then he stopped. The entire landscape had transformed, spread across his land. Emerging from the morning mist like spirits materializing from legend, were Apache people. Dozens of them, men, women, children, elders. They appeared silently, on foot and horseback, arranged in a vast semicircle that faced the small cabin where Nate and Kurik now lived. Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle he wasn't carrying. Every story of massacre and violence flooded his mind. He stood frozen, a solitary white man facing what appeared to be an entire Apache band. Then Nate emerged from her cabin. She looked at Thomas, then at her people, and something profound passed across her face. A mixture of joy, relief, and deep emotion. Kurik stood beside her, holding his mother's hand, tears streaming down his young face. An elderly man stepped forward from the group. He moved with dignity despite his years, his weathered face telling stories of survival that no book could capture. He approached Thomas slowly, giving him time to process, to choose his response. Thomas made his choice. He walked forward, unarmed, until he stood face to face with the elder. Through Nate, who moved between them to translate. The elder spoke. His words were formal, ceremonial, weighted with significance. He explained that Nate had sent word to her people about Thomas's unprecedented gift. In Apache culture, such an act created a bond of honor. They had come at dawn, the sacred time of new beginnings. to witness this bond and to offer their own gift in return. The gift was protection and knowledge. The Apache would ensure that no harm came to Thomas's ranch from any Apache band. More than that, they would teach him to truly understand this land, to work with it rather than against it. They would show him where the hidden springs flowed, how to move cattle through the mountains safely, and how to read the desert's subtle languages. But there was a condition. Thomas must keep Nate and Kurek safe. Always. He must defend their right to the land even when soldiers came asking questions, even when neighbors threatened him, even when keeping his word meant losing everything else. Thomas didn't hesitate. Through Nate, he gave his word, binding himself to people he'd been taught to fear. What followed was revolutionary for that time and place. The Apache taught Thomas methods of ranching that worked with the land's natural rhythms. His cattle thrived in ways neighboring ranches couldn't match. Word spread of the strange arrangement, bringing both curiosity and hostility. Army officers came twice, but found nothing illegal. Just a rancher who employed an Apache family. The neighboring ranchers eventually noticed that Thomas's land never suffered from the raids that occasionally struck other properties. They noticed his success during droughts that devastated their herds. Slowly, grudgingly, their hostility transformed into cautious respect. Thomas McKenzie never became wealthy, never sought fame or recognition. He lived out his years on that Arizona land, alongside Nate and Kurek, who eventually built families of their own. When Thomas died in 1897, Apache people came from across the territory to honor him. They buried him on the land he'd given away, in a ceremony that blended Apache traditions with his own. The story reminds us that humanity's greatest moments often come from simple choices, from seeing people rather than categories, from choosing compassion when the world demands suspicion. Thomas McKenzie gave land when land was everything. In return, he received something more valuable: belonging, purpose, and proof that bridges can be built even across the deepest divides. This is Whisper of the Past, reminding you that history's most powerful stories aren't always the ones written in official records, but the ones that show us what we're capable of becoming.